Hello, everyone. Today is a very exciting day for me. I've been so looking forward to our next guest. Kelly Corrigan is a shero of mine. She's an incredible author of 5.5 books. She's a girl mom that I look up to so much. She talks a lot on her incredible podcast, Kelly Corrigan Wonders. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. And she's also the host of the PBS show, Tell Me More. She talks a lot about her life, her journey, grief, joy, wisdom, curiosity. And I just want you to know, Kelly, I'm thrilled to have you here.
Hi, how are you? You
Hi.
may miss Northern California.
Oh, well then come on back. Come back and see us.
Yeah.
Um, Kelly, I remember so clearly. I remember where I was, kind of, how I was, what I was doing when I read your book, The Middle Place, which is the
Mm.
your first book and the book that really it not only made me know about you, but it made me know about this idea of vulnerable storytelling, especially as it relates to grief. And there was just something in that first book that like grabbed hold of my heart and made me want to know you. And so I just have been really honored over these past few years to get to know you and to see your work in action. So I just want to thank you for that. I'll
You're
start with that.
so welcome. I thank Anne Lamott for that because it was her book about her first year as a mother with her son Sam. It's called Operating Instructions. I bet lots of people listening have read it.
Yes, I love that book.
I had, I was an English major in college, and then I have a master's in English Lit that I got at night when I was working at United Way in San Francisco. And then at night, I was getting this master's at San Francisco State. And so I was reading like Dickens and Shakespeare. And I just didn't have an awareness that there were writers like Anne Lamott who were writing
Mm.
in that unguarded tone that could still have, could still pack a punch. I mean, she moved me. And I was not, when I read it, I was not a mom. I was totally single and had no sense of where my life was leading. And still, she had me on every page. And reading that book really changed what I thought was possible for me as a writer. Because if you're reading the best of the best, if you're reading the classics, if you're reading stuff that has withstood the test of time and is taught in graduate schools, you are not going to feel particularly capable of jumping in. But when you read someone who is sort of walking this line between pretty profound, but in a very ordinary tongue, and telling stories from her life rather than working inside a novel or a fiction. That was a big aha for me. It was like, oh, maybe I could do this. Maybe this is what I could do.
Well, I mean, that's such a beautiful segue to our conversation because so much of what I think happens when we are trying to create our next chapter or find clarity in our lives is we start seeking, and we start, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we start seeking for the pathways that feel like there's light in them, right? Like when I read your book, it really did that for me. It illuminated a path that it hadn't occurred to me before, that storytelling could be that vulnerable, that raw, that and also just that the day-to-day humanness of it. And so I feel like we don't know how we're impacting people. And Anne Lamott impacted you in a beautiful book that I also love. And you paid that forward to impact me and millions of others. And I just think there's such a really beautiful snowball, creative human effect that's kind of unknowable, right? We,
Mm-hmm.
we we have
Mm-hmm.
no idea the impact that we can make in like one drop at a time.
Yeah, and I just feel like it's a testament to the idea of staying porous,
Mm,
like let things affect you and then be observant. Like, I used to always say to the girls, keep a running inventory on your moods, especially your most extreme moods. And if you have that, if you get flooded with a little adrenaline and you're moving kind of fast and you're talking kind of fast and you're taking steps more quickly than you normally do towards something, like let that be the signal you need that you're
right.
onto something. And if you find yourself dragging your feet and if you find yourself avoiding, that's something to investigate too. And it just may mean that you're trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. It just may be some kind of indicator or signal that your behavior is trying to tell you something.
Right. It's interesting is it reminds me of, I think one of the things that you do so beautifully on your podcast is you're such an active listener. Like it's just so I can almost see you listening when I hear, you know what I mean? Like, but what you're saying is that active listening is internal as well, like to be really attentive to what those, like for your daughters, what's the range? What are the emotions that are lighting your fire and what are the ones that are dragging you down?
Yes, and your emotions, they're trying to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
So if like every day before you go to lacrosse practice, you have like a knot in your stomach, that's interesting. That's like really worth thinking about. And and every time you take out a book, you feel the knot untie and you feel your shoulders drop. Super interesting. Good data. I like that data. Like as a source, I feel like sometimes we outsmart ourselves, like we outthink ourselves. Like we're there's all this evidence that gets overridden by thoughts, and thoughts are so polluted by culture, and culture is so fucked up. I mean, if you were to listen to the messages of billboards and advertisements, which are reflecting culture, you would get pointed in such terrible directions.
Absolutely.
I mean, all you do is like buy things and then buy more things. That's what the messages are.
And you would be convinced that you are absolutely not enough. Ever.
Inadequate.
Ever.
Yeah. I mean, capitalism totally depends on us being vulnerable to the idea that we're inadequate as is.
Right.
And that's why
yes, it's built on that. It depends and thrives on that. And it's so interesting because I think, and I'm sure that you've experienced this too. Like I have lost count of the brilliant, creative, vibrant women that I have met along the way that are convinced that they aren't enough. And it's like kind of unpacking, unwinding that, I think I mean, for me professionally has been one of my ultimate challenges. I've built a whole organization around that, but you're right. It's embedded. It's,
yeah. And that kind of goes to the great quantification. Like if you're looking for evidence that you're enough or not enough, if you're trying to gauge like what's your Q rating out there, then there's a lot of ways where it's represented numerically back to you through followers and likes and the number of books you've sold and the number of downloads to your podcast and the number of reviews of your podcast. And do you have a 4.6 rating or do you have a 4.9 rating? And how many does the podcast that you compare yourself to have? And so it's no wonder that people have this kind of running concern. But that goes to the greatest single active agency we all have, which is to what do we attend? So with the podcast, I remember in the early days with Susan George, who was my first producer and our mutual friend and someone I love and miss.
Someone I love as well. Yes. She's just a beautiful person.
Brilliant and delightful and funny. All the great things that a woman can be. But anyway, I would, if I were to follow my moods, as I was recommending to my children, if I were to like keep the inventory running, the things that lit me up were having conversations like this one. And the things that dragged me down were looking at our numbers because I thought that we should be growing faster. And then enter agency. And then it was like, I'm not going to look at these numbers.
Right.
I'm going to take a month off and let them do what they're going to do. Because you could hit refresh all day long. We
Yeah. The
publish
more I hit refresh,
three
the more I hit
episodes a week.
refresh.
Yes. Yes, it's
Right.
a terrible habit. It's a terrible, terrible habit. And habits were meant to be broken.
Mhm. So what changed when you attended to
To the
what
work, I was
to
just in
the
a better
work?
mood. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just in a way better mood. And you know, that's what you're doing. And honestly, like even if your numbers doubled or tripled, it would just be a matter of time before you wanted them to double and triple again. I mean, I think a little human nature. It could be one of those things that seems like human nature, but it's really American nature. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's like a global, worldwide, across time and culture feature, built in, unavoidable feature of humanity, or if it's just a lot of cultural submersion in in a place where we're so deeply enmeshed with achievement culture. But you just would, within a matter of days, start to wonder, God, I wonder if you could get to the next level.
And I
Like that thought's coming back.
right, right. It's interesting. I was thinking about a choreographer that I used to work with who said that all she cared about was how quickly she could get back into creative flow when she lost it. And the things that pull us out of creative flow are exactly what you're talking about, right? Like we start measuring ourselves, we look for external validation, we like, and so she was just like, all I care about. I don't create an unexpected false reality that I could possibly stay in creative flow all the time. All I try to do is get back to it as quickly as possible when I lose my way.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm talking about something that a state that you could only pursue if you did not have serious financial consequences to that related to those numbers.
Right.
So I'm married. My husband has an income. I have an income from previous efforts and other projects. And so in that sense, it's okay for me to look away a little bit because I have multiple revenue streams, both my own and my husband's. And I have saved, I mean, I'm 56, I've saved. I would love to save. I'm not a spender. And so, I just want to flag that because if you're, a person who is holding your family together and you got
Right.
to get the right numbers so that you can get the right ad dollars, so that you can get the right after tax income to take care of people, then you're going to have to live by the numbers, die by the numbers. In which case, I sort of wonder if there's a way to preserve your relationship with your creative work by sort of having a day job where it's like there's a thing I do for income and health insurance, and then
Right.
there's a thing I do that totally feeds me, gets me out of bed in the morning. Like that, maybe you should see if there's a way to detangle the two so that your creative flow doesn't get crushed with economic concerns. But
100%.
that has assumptions baked into it too that may not be realistic. I mean, that's just a lot of hours that you got to find in a day.
It's interesting. I used to be a professional dancer, and one of the things that happened for me, my in my early 20s, I had a mentor who said when I wanted to really pursue a career in dance, and I just assumed that I would wait tables like all the other artists before me. And she gave me this kind of new idea that I had a bit of marketing experience. And she gave me this kind of idea of like, well, you could do freelance marketing consulting and maybe that is your waitressing that affords you the ability to live in San Francisco and pursue a dance career. And it really was like an unbelievable gift that she gave me of new perspective. But what ended up happening was that, there was that was two full-time jobs. And then when I layered on top of that being a mom, that something had to give. So there are always possibilities of how you put together how we can realistically live and work in this world and often pursue creative passions that are notorious for not paying us until you run out of minutes. Like that's for me. It was like, I had to make some hard choices when I had two kids, because it was no longer tenable to have two full-time professions that were both very taxing, and two children.
I mean, sometimes I think, the creativity is really tested by limitations. Like, it's like, okay, so here's where I am in life. I got 10 years where I got to make this much money because I got to cover this many costs for this many people. And so how do I keep some thread alive? The 10-minute a day kind of model, which is
Right.
so that I know that 10 years from now, once I meet these financial requirements and people are taken care of, that I have a way to like drop back in, or I have that part of me is like still alive. Although I think it's a rumor and I think it's a rumor we tell ourselves that it dies. I don't think that's the case.
The creativity, you mean?
No, I
No.
think it's like in there. I think it's like woven into you, and
I agree.
I think it's woven into most people. I mean, I don't think that, it's just a matter of definition. Like, it doesn't mean that most people are painters or dancers or writers, but like creative is creative. Like figuring out how to glue together a family schedule in a way that works for everybody can be a very creative exercise.
100%. I have a bookkeeper who I think is so creative in the way that she presents numbers to me in a way that I get. I mean, there's so many ways to be creative. I do think it's inherent in all of us. And I think the light can be dimmed, and it can feel hard to access it when we feel like unvalidated and burnt out. Like I'm still imagining you, like looking at those numbers and hitting refresh. For me, that created that energy, when I was really having to shift my business after the pandemic shut down our spaces, that energy of like rescuing something, tending to something, measuring something, watching the numbers, hoping, praying, crossing my fingers, it burnt out the space for creativity. And it's like it was still in there, but it was squished.
Yeah, sure.
So it's interesting to me. And I'm curious, and I'll ask this question outright. I think a lot of people look up to you as someone that can, really access a place of storytelling and vulnerability and beautiful words. And it feels like your creativity is on the front burner, but I'm sure that you have had those experiences too of burnout or what, like you said, you had to take a month off from looking at numbers, or maybe even from creating the podcast altogether. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think of it as burnout, but there are of course periods of like deep distraction.
Right.
Where all things come to a stop. So if you have a kid in crisis, like no way.
Nothing else matters.
You can't get there. I can't care about anything. Like what I would say these periods are where I'm quote unproductive or on pause is really the best way to think about it, the most neutral way to think about it. Because I think it's important how we think about things. I think like strive for neutrality when you talk to yourself. When it's on pause, it's because something has come along that makes it all look a little silly. Mm-hmm. So there are probably the most dangerous set of thoughts I have in terms of bringing it all to a screeching halt are, who could possibly care? There are 5 million podcasts. I mean, Random House publishes thousands of books a year. How much content is there on television? How many interview shows are there? Like, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, like the hole would fill instantly. The water would cover it, and you'd never know there was a person there. And that's true. That's just a true thing. There's a lot of content in the world, and I'm not that special. And it is also true that like every week we get these emails. And so for some people, for the little tiny sliver of a corner of the world who is tracking me and my shit, it's helpful. It's useful. And that sort of matches my perspective about everything I do, which is, yes, you're making things that are really helpful to people, to some little handful of people. And that matters. They're real people and they're living real lives. And if it makes you feel better and feel more ready for whatever happens in your life next, like that is good work. That is work I am proud to provide. And if you weren't getting it from me, you'd get it from somebody else. There's plenty of people that have really, really good content to share, that they put a lot of care and love into their work, that, are translating intelligently and with some wisdom to what is needed.
I agree with you. And I think it's because each of us is so unique, and our pain and experience and joy and grief and wisdom and, and heartbreak and friendship, like all of that it's like we have it in common, and the combination that we have kind of put together to come to this place in our lives, it creates such a unique, like almost like DNA strand.
Mm-hmm.
That I think for that reason, your uniqueness resonates with my uniqueness in a way that could never be replicated. Do you know what I mean? Like when I read your book, the feeling that I had, could I go pick up another book? Sure. You're right. It's true. But I do think I actually think, if I think of what puts me in creative flow, it's the excitement of that, like, wow, each of us has something unique, and we don't know how that touches somebody else's unique thing and
Yes.
resonates. And I get
Yes.
really excited about that.
Yes. Yes. And that goes to stop summarizing, be specific, which
Mm,
is to say, it's only unique if I bother to give you the detail.
mhm.
If I summarize, if I say I had a hard day, and then you give me the face that says, tell me more. And then I say, oh, kid stuff. And then you give me the face that says, tell me more. I say, you know, George is struggling at work. You give me the face and I say, there's somebody there. She feels like doesn't have her back. And then you give me the face. Like it's the specificity that is the
Right,
gift. And when
right.
I'm writing, my editor is this guy named Andy Ward, who's really beloved in publishing. He's very, very well known in those circles. Um, he edits like Judd Apatow and Lena Dunham and George Saunders and Lucky, Lucky, Lucky Me. And he says, stick with story. No
Mm,
punchlines, only story. And that I just think interpersonally it's true too. Like I just had the best long conversation with these friends of mine, Jeff and Michelle. We didn't summarize. She just told me a story in like really granular detail. And I just listened to the story carefully. That was it. And it was so much more impactful
right.
for both of us than it would have been if we had tried to do that thing that people want to do, which is say, well, it's a great, that's growth, like it's a great experience, or, just some crap that you like
Right.
slap on top of something complex. It just ruins it. Like just let it be there in its unbelievable, challenging complexity.
It's so
That's
interesting because I think about my female friendships. Um, Susan George being a dear, dear friend of mine, who's our person in common. But, you know, the best female friendships are the ones that go there. Kind of, I hate to say it, but go there faster, where there's no pretense. You go to what's true, you go to what's honest. There's space to go to like the time peeling back the onion is faster. You know what I mean? Like I think we've all,
yes.
well, I shouldn't say all, but I know I have completely lost patience for small talk. I can't do it anymore. I
Yeah.
can't. Like cocktail party talk just crushes my soul because of exactly what you're talking about. Like
Yeah.
I want to I want to go to what's real, or just be in the same room together. Like we don't have to be, you know,
Right.
sharing the deep dark secrets all the time, but staying on the surface is like it crushes me more than it used to.
Yeah. And that's, you know, that's writing and that's podcast conversations and that's interviewing people. It's like knowing how to get there
Yeah.
faster, and then, having the just the deep confidence to stay there, to
Right.
not rush it along, to not like come all the way back up. Like just let it sit right there.
That is certainly, and I know you have written and talked so much about grief and loss of people that you love. And, so much of what I am fascinated and committed by is just that the people that I have seen make such incredible transformation in their lives often make it from the darkest hour, right? It's like it often comes from a place of real darkness, real grief, real confusion of like, who am I without this person, or loss of, identity as it relates to someone that either died or left you or whatever it is, right? But that real dark place of loss, I've just seen time and time again. Again, if we look at if we're talking about like historical data over the course of a decade of doing this work, I just see time and time again, like this incredible, profound transformation that comes from that place. And I think it's because of exactly what you're talking about. Like, it's when we are willing to inspect it and be in it and feel it, and often have someone that we can just go there with, really talk about it and get it. I mean, the cliches around grief are so brutal of like, oh, they're in a better place now, or so, some of those like kind of crazy wackadoodle dumb things that people can say to you when you're hurting. And what you're talking about is not just being willing to be vulnerable as the person that's sharing, but being willing to hold space for that pain as the person that's listening.
Yeah, and for the specifics of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's you're either like clearing space so that they can give you the whole story,
Right.
or you're just tidying it up and pushing it along, and trying to get to the dismount of the story. And you
Mm-hmm.
see it all the time. I love him. I love my husband to death, but like I watch him do it. I watch him nudge it along. And I think,
Mm.
oh my God, Edward, this conversation, this story wants to be about 20 minutes. And we've been talking about it for 3. So
Right.
like it is not time to
To tie it
zone
up.
out and start talking about the Golden State Warriors or the Eagles. Like we're staying. Like, and that, like reading somebody's body language and having a decent barometer of when they want to do the 20-minute version.
Right.
Like you got to clue into that you have to like hear that. You have to, it's almost like, how big is the increment that was represented by the last sentence? Is it a minute or is
Mm-hmm.
it 6 months? Because if it's a minute, what they're trying to tell you is, I want to give you the blow by blow. And if they're giving you like this, if you're moving in 6-month increments, then we're just going to sweep through it. It's
Right.
going to be a quickie. They don't want to. They just did it with somebody else last weekend. They just did it with their therapist. They just wrote in their journal. Not today. But like reading that, it's just incredible. It's actually like it's the skill of a lifetime to be in a conversation in a way, it's so subtle, in a way that really serves the person. But if you have to switch to serving yourself and your own discomfort, then that's going to trump what's happening with the other person. So if it's
Right.
starting to get like a little intense for you, serving yourself will get in the way. But if you have the faith to say like, it's fine, she doesn't want anything from me, she doesn't want an answer, she doesn't want a solution, she doesn't want a bromide, she doesn't want a maxim, she wants to tell the story.
Right.
Just like,
Right.
go ahead. I'm gonna never forget driving around with Claire about, I don't know, 6 months into the pandemic. She was a junior, then a senior during the pandemic. And she's a very level-headed person and she's not prone to whining. And she just kind of cracked and said, I'm so sick of this shit. This is like ruining my life. Like I'm not having, it's like you work your whole life to be like a senior in high school. Like everything's supposed to be so fun when you're a senior in high school. You did all that work. You took all those APs, you busted your ass on all those stupid applications, and it's not fun at all. I'm not having fun at all.
Right.
And I said, go on. And she's like, basketball. Like I can't play any of the sports, indoor sports. And so I'm not exercising and all I do is sit around and eat. So I feel fat and ugly and blah, blah, blah. Go on. I see like two people, and one of the people I see is super uptight about the germs, and the other person I see is not uptight about the germs. Then my two people found out that I was seeing both of them, and the person who's uptight said she doesn't want me to see the person who's loosey goosey because she thinks I'm going to be carrying COVID back and forth between the two of them and ruining her whole like vacuum sealed life. Go on.
Right.
I mean, Grace, she must have had 18 things. She went on for 40 minutes, like all this stuff. I'm so sick of my room. I could scream. Like I cannot, I watched the other day, I watched television for 11 hours. Like, how depressing it is to watch television for 11 hours. I used to like want to go like buy clothes and like put together little outfits, but like for what? Just on and on and on. And I was like, this is so instructive to me that to not stop this, to just, in fact, to elicit it, to elongate it. And it's a funny tension in my marriage, and it's possible that he's right. And I think sometimes he is right for sure, where he's like, how do you know you're not making it worse? How do you know you're not generating like rumination? And I always say like, it's just my experience as on my side of the equation that when I get it all out, I just feel a lot lighter. Like even if they don't have anything to say about it, they don't have any advice, they don't have any way to point me, nothing. I just feel a little lighter just based on their expression, which is to say the expression of, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I know, like, I know, I love those words. I know, like way better than you should, or did you try, or that's so separating. But like, I know is like, great. Let's just sink into it just for a second. And then we go on with our days.
It's so true. And, I think about the times that I have been afraid to say too much for fear of being judged for piling on. Do you know what I mean? Like that idea of like
kitchen sinking.
Yeah. Now you're just like, now you're piling on. Like you have an emotion and you're like piling on. And then there's this, and then there's that, and then there's this, and then there's that. And I have held back in conversations before because I thought like, I can't do that to this person.
Yeah.
And yet first of all, what a gift to be trusted with holding all of that. Like what a gift it can be as a friend on the other side to say like, I'll just hold that for you. Let it out. And things won't be solved. I won't tell you how to fix it, but you will feel lighter and I will hold it. And that's such an honor. Like it's such an honor that
it's probably true. Like when you're saying I'm holding back because I don't want to seem whiny or like a victim or like I'm kitchen sinking them. It's probably true that the person you're talking to has had that moment too. And it's
totally
like, oh, great. You're a baby sometimes too.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like we are, but it's fine. You're allowed to be a big fat baby sometimes. And if you show me you're a big fat baby sometimes, then I'm going to be a big fat baby with you sometimes. And then we can laugh about it later. Tomorrow we could be like, whoa, I was really just feeling.
I went there.
Bad. Yeah. And you'll come out of it. It's fine.
Yeah. I think I mean, and again, it's kind of what I was talking about with your style of writing and storytelling and interviewing is just, if it's honest, even when it's ugly, like it just, I think we just crave it. I think about when I was first studying dance in San Francisco, I studied with Alonzo King, who's the artistic director of Lines Contemporary Ballet. And he would say to us, and there's like a famous video that he has done that where he had these words, but he said this in class too. He would say, women, don't be pretty. It's a lie. Like, be beautiful and tell the truth. It
That
stuck
is
with me.
great.
Oh, he blew my mind. But then, and you would think about like, what are the ways that this translates as an artist? Like, how can I, like, if pretty is a lie and nice is on the surface, as an artist, as a creator, as an entrepreneur, as a parent, there's all these ways that we can, like, how much more beautiful is it to tell the
That
truth?
is so great. That's like the best thing I've heard in a long time. Don't be pretty, be beautiful.
Mhm.
That is so different. That is such a different thing.
I agree. And I feel it. I get the shivers even as I say it. It's also that it's this, it's similar to that concept of like the difference between nice and kind, right? Like,
Yeah.
nice is like that surface level conversation,
Yeah.
and kind is when the deeper resonance of the truth.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not pretty to be kind. Sometimes it takes like being willing to go there, like being like willing to show up for the ugly cry. Like,
Yes.
that's
That's
kind.
yes.
Mm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm curious, you know, I know I was so informed, like I was, the example I just gave you of with Alonzo King and as a dancer, like there's so much that I feel like I learned. I don't dance as much anymore. I wish I could say I did. I mean, I don't usually use this language, but I probably should. Honestly, I probably should. Because for me, it was such like a flashlight, like of
Yeah.
like where I was and how I related to, you know, me as an individual in this body, in space, in, you know, connection to other human beings, whether they're watching you or dancing with you or teaching you, like I think about what I learned as a dancer so much for what I do now. And I'm curious for you, like, how do you use writing and your work as these tools? Like how does that incorporate into creating what's next for you? Like, how do you use your expression?
I mean, I love words. And I mean, probably even more than writing has been reading for me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and also grad school. Like in grad school, my first professor was this guy, Michael Krasny, who
Yes, of
Bay Area
course.
people will know that he had a radio show for 20 years called Forum on KQED. And but he was my professor, my first professor at San Francisco State, which I had thought of wrongly as like a fancy book club. I was a
Right.
total snob. I was like, I've never heard of San Francisco State. I'm from Philadelphia. So I'm thinking of all these Northeast colleges. And it was like, how hard could this be? Ha ha ha. Like these people go to get a master's in English lit at night are these people in my class were brilliant. They're reading 2,000 pages a week. They're reading criticism. They're putting it all together. And it's a very specific kind of intelligence, like
Right.
literary analysis. And Krasny was such a specific communicator. He said something very specific that could only be one thing ultimately. And he did it because he had this enormous working vocabulary. He used so many words in a given 3-hour class that I had a running list of words to look up when I got home. And that specificity was very attractive to me. I was like, that is the coolest thing a person could do because it's the foundation of connection.
Right.
Like when he's saying something very small and detailed about a plot point or a way a character was developed in the scene, I'm connecting with him in a peculiar, never to be repeated way.
Mm.
And it really made me aspire to specificity. And I think of all the things that have affected me, reading people like Marilyn Robinson is someone I really admire. I mean, a lot of people admire her. She won the Pulitzer, and she's generally agreed upon to be brilliant. But reading her, reading Margaret Atwood, sitting in Krasny's class, and a lot of the professors at San Francisco State, because if you read a lot of literature, you get really good at talking. You get really good at explaining an idea, and that stuff can be so soft, and they gave it an edge. They drew it very carefully with a fine point, and I really admire that. And to the extent that the net effect of all 400 interviews and all this work on PBS and all this writing, which is really rewriting and word choice and sequencing, to the extent that that makes me able to connect more specifically with other people, what a great outcome.
Right. Right. I'm so fascinated by that, of like the choices we make, sometimes without knowing why we're doing them, and how they inform us kind of going again. If the purpose of this podcast is to explore next chapters, and that can often feel so uncertain of like, what do I do now? And who am I now? And why do I feel so stuck? And all the, these ideas, like, and if the purpose of this kind of podcast is to understand the things that take us closer to clarity, that's been the biggest surprise for me, of like, we take these actions, we make these decisions. Some are big, like going to grad school, some are small, and they all come together to inform and guide this kind of opening of our lives, of like where we're going to go from here. And I
know. And I'm watching my kids do it right now. So I'm watching Claire. Georgia's in the world. She has a job. She graduated in May, but Claire's looking for a summer job after her junior year in college. And I feel her and hear her so wanting to know, if I do this, then this will. I hear all of her assumptions.
Exactly.
If I do this, then this is going to happen. And it's like, if you do that, you have no idea what's going to happen, because you think you're doing it for this reason, but turns out the takeaway is this. You fall in love with the guy sitting next to you at work. You decide you hate computer science. The person that you work for takes a new job next summer and calls you and says, do you want to be an intern at my big company or my little startup? Like, you just have to be comfortable with the fact that you get into something, you settle in, and you stay porous. And that somewhere in there, a little pebble is going to appear that you can step out on. But that's it. You can't stop telling yourself that that A leads to B. For all you know, A leads to F, and F leads to Z, and Z leads back to B.
I could not agree with you more, because I think that is where stuckness comes from. Stuckness comes from the expectation that we will be able to lay out all the pathways and bricks in order to get to this outcome that we've decided is perfect for us. Right. And that's where we become frozen.
It's so stupid. It's so stupid. There's so few jobs like that. And there's so few careers like that. That's something that's like utterly evident after 400 interviews. That is not how people's lives work, unless you go to like med school.
And even
then you're like, I thought I was going to be in obstetrics, but then it turns out I love pediatrics. But then once I got out, I realized I was a writer. So then I wrote this book, and the book was really popular. And now I give speeches about pediatrics. And now I'm teaching in a medical school, because the thing I said in my book, yes, like just one step at a time, not because that's all you can handle, but because that's all that is knowable.
Right.
Of course you could plan it all out. And of course people want to, but like, you can't see very far. You can't see nearly as far as people think they should be able to.
Exactly.
That's the next step.
Well, and one of the things that I work on with women in the high read community is when you don't know what to do, like connecting to your deeper why for why you would do it. Like, I know for me, my deeper why is kind of the earlier part of the conversation. I just get so excited about the unique potential that lies in each of us, that I want to see it and know it, and I want it to be shared. I get really excited about that. But what do you think of for right now, like what's your deeper why in your work? Like what's kind of
Sometimes it's just a really honest curiosity to see what it would take to make X.
mm,
Like I really want to make a movie only because I want to know what it is to make a movie. I just want to live the experience of making a movie. I want to
yes.
understand how all the pieces come together and it's like a puzzle that I want to do. Um Sometimes my why is like, oh, I have this opportunity, like something there was an incoming moment, because I'm out there, because I'm in the sort of public eye in some small way. Like sometimes it's something comes to me that's like, oh, sure, I'll try that. That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Um, and and then it's like, well, I wonder how you could do that better than it's typically done. Like I'm interviewing Matthew McConaughey next week. He's been interviewed 2,000 times. And it's like, oh, this is kind of fun for me. Like how could you do it in a way that it hasn't been done yet?
Yeah.
And to what end? Like what could you offer in that conversation that would be more than just the audience thinking, oh my God, he's such a funny guy. Oh my God, he's such a talented guy. Oh my God, what a nice guy. Like they can get that. That feeling is available. They can get that feeling in lots of different places. But like what would what could the conversation yield that would be like, I went and saw this woman talking to Matthew McConaughey, and it was so interesting because what they really got to was
Right.
so sometimes I like to imagine whoever is listening, watching, or reading whatever I'm putting out, and like what would the dream be that they would say? Like I used to imagine it all the time with my books that people would close the book at the end and look at their spouse and like, what do I want them to say? And
Mm,
I often wanted them to say like, oh, that was worth every minute. Because I feel like reading a book is like a big gift. Like that's a real
right.
commitment. It's not just like buying a candy bar, or drinking a cup of coffee. It's like a whole thing. You spend a month with it and you're choosing it over all the other ways that you could spend your disposable minutes. And I just want people to feel like it was so worth it. But imagining them hearing it, watching it, or reading it helps me try harder.
Yeah.
Helps me not phone it in because it's like they're giving me time.
Right.
Like whoever's listening to this, like is listening to this whole conversation, it's like an hour of their life. Like they have things to
Right.
do. Like they didn't exercise, their beds aren't made, their kids crying, so it's like, what can I make it worth it to you?
Mm. That's and it's beautiful, but it's connected. It's connected to this generosity that I think is really it's really beautiful and really motivating. I'm going to
It's
remember
like
that.
respect. It's like I just
Yeah.
respect. I respect everybody's time in a
Yeah.
world that is full of things to put in your head.
Yeah.
And then if you picked me to put in your head for a minute, I really want to be worth it.
Yes. Yes. That's really beautiful. Well, it is worth it. I mean, again, I adore your podcast. I know that there are so many people listening to this that will jump over and listen to your podcast as they do on a regular basis. I guess my last question for you is what would you say, to someone that is listening that feels really unsure of what to do next?
Do
That,
something small, just a little thing. Like you
yes,
can you can like go into the world and like pull something into you that will make your capacity to do whatever the thing is a tiny bit greater. And it's not like an idea, it's a fact. Like if you want to open a cafe and you just said, I'm gonna Google like the last 5 cafes that were open in my zip code.
right.
Like just that tiny thing that might take you like, it'll take you no time to Google it, but you might sit on the computer for 15 minutes and it's like that, or looking at Instagram for 15 minutes. But at the end of the 15 minutes, like you're slightly more capable than you were 15 minutes ago of like taking the next step
Yes,
or
yes,
looking up the prices of the kind of turkey you like because you're going to make these sandwiches out of this turkey. Like just knowing that number is just you're a tiny bit closer to having enough information to make the move. So like just the tiniest moves will actually increase your capacity. It's not just so that you can say you did something or whatever. It's literally making you more ready to do the thing, whatever the thing is.
So true. And tiny actions that are connected to a deeper yearning go somewhere. They go forward.
So energizing. It's so energizing.
Yes. Oh, Kelly, you're the best. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. And I know our listeners will be so happy to hear from you. And I thank you for all the work that you do, all the wisdom that you share with us, and the wisdom that you give others, the safe container to share of their own story. So you're doing beautiful work in the world. Thank you so much.
You too, Grace. Thank you so much.
I hope you found this episode helpful, idea-provoking, and inspiring, especially if you're in the midst of creating or clarifying your next chapter. I can't even put into words how much I appreciate you, your vulnerability, your stories of creating a life and meaningful work amidst adversity, grief, ever-changing and challenging times, and of course, life's peaks and uncertain valleys. You are seekers, wisdom sharers, and artists of life, and together we can build meaningful next chapters that feel aligned with who we really are, what we're put on this earth to do, and how we can make a difference one human being at a time. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and I would love it if you could leave a review for the art of what's next. If you know someone who wants to create a new chapter or who would appreciate this episode, please share it with them. You can text it to them or email them the link or post about the show on your Instagram. If you want more help in creating your own meaningful next chapter, join the Hivery newsletter to get inspiration, stories, and resources to help you create your next chapter like an artist. Sign up at thehivery.com/podcast or at the link in the show notes.